Hi everyone, in this video we are going to discuss fuel cells. So fuel cells are kind of like a battery or the conventional batteries that we've been talking about, but they are very, very different because they are constantly supplied their source of fuel. So the batteries we've discussed so far, the alkaline, the NiCad, or the lead acid battery, they show up at your doorstep with the fuel already inside of the container. So that is a classic standard conventional battery. With a fuel cell, the major difference is that this battery is going on right here. Your cell, your electrochemical cell is happening right here, but you are constantly providing a fuel source to it, okay? So we need to make sure that we have these two different types of batteries very, very separate in our brain. So now, we're going to do a lot of notes in this video, so get ready to write stuff down. So let's start off with something very simple here, which is just a basic definition of a fuel cell. It is an electrochemical cell that produces electricity by converting chemical energy into electrical energy. So it sounds like the exact same definition of a standard battery, but here's the piece. Here's the big difference. It's without burning fuel. Okay, so we're not burning fuel. We're not using fuel here. What we're doing is we're constantly supplying fuel. All right? So this process was originally discovered in 1839, but it gained a lot of its notoriety from the space system, okay? So space system, NASA specifically, definitely uses fuel cells. They're very, very important in order to use rockets and everything that they do. We don't have the time to go into that, but please come talk to me about it afterwards if you're interested. There's so much cool information. But basically, the space system really, really, really focused in on fuel cells, and they optimize a lot of the processes in there, so that's really nice. Now, here's how they work. You must have an external / constant fuel supply. The second you run out of fuel or you stop providing your fuel cell with fuel, the cell will no longer function, okay? You have to do that. Now, in addition to this, and this is usually the component that most students forget, so make sure you remember this, you have to have a fuel supply, but you also need an external oxidant. Okay, so that's usually oxygen gas. It's usually what we use there. We just provide oxygen gas, and then you can easily have your explosions and your oxidation and reduction reactions, okay? Now, the chemicals in a fuel cell, this is super important. They're all important, sorry, but I keep saying they're important, but the chemicals are physically separated. They do not touch, okay? That's very crucial for a fuel cell. They do not touch. They're physically separated, all right? So that means there's no recharging. But that also means that these will not die. Okay, if you're constantly supplying the fuel, they're not going to run out. They're not going to eventually recharge so much that they've created all these byproducts that they can no longer function. In theory, a fuel cell can run forever as long as you constantly give it a supply of fuel. All right, now here's the next component, which we usually care a lot about, which is your anode and your cathode. So for your anode, same as always, it's the location of oxidation. Whereas your cathode is simply the location of reduction. So in a fuel cell, instead of pointing to an electrode and saying, here is your anode and here is your cathode, you can't do that because there are no electrodes. So instead of saying this electrode's anode, this electrode's cathode, we point to a specific section and say the oxidation is happening on this side, this overall thing is your anode. This is where the reduction's happening, this side is all the cathode side or the cathodic side, okay? So that's how we identify these pieces. So here is my question to you. If this all makes sense, this hopefully will make sense to you. You'll be able to answer this question. So fuel cells do not release carbon dioxide. Okay, that's beautiful. That's a huge advantage right away of a fuel cell. So, what could the fuel source B. I'm going to give you some options there. Go. All right, did you get an answer? Hopefully you did, but if you didn't, that's okay. It was kind of vague and a little bit challenging, but what I would have done personally is looked at this carbon dioxide and said, okay, a fuel cell does not release carbon dioxide, so carbon or carbon dioxide cannot be in the product or the reactant side. So right away, I would eliminate every single option that has carbon in the fuel source. And the only thing that I gave you as an option for your fuel supply was hydrogen that did not have the carbon in there. So hydrogen's the only possible answer. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and provide you with this whole oxidation and reduction half reactions, but hopefully in the future you would be able to, or actually at this point, you would be able to identify these yourself. So the oxidation half reaction for a hydrogen fuel cell usually starts with H2 gas. We know hydrogen is a diatomic, so it always exists naturally as H2. Then it breaks apart to 2H plus in the aqueous state, and it also releases 2 electrons. Now that's your oxidation reaction. Your reduction half reaction starts off with half of O2 gas. We treat that with 2 H pluses from the aqueous state. We also treat that with 2 electrons, okay? So those all come together to create H2O gas, so water vapor or water in the gaseous state. Now, if we put this all together, we can add these up and come up with a chemical equation. So the first thing we do is make sure that we can cross out our electrons. So I see 2 on my product side and 2 on my reactant side. I can definitely eliminate those out. Now we want to check for any other reagents or any other reactants or products that are the same on each side. And the first thing I see is that I have 2 H pluses on my product side and I have 2 H pluses on my reactant side. So those cancel out. Everything else is unique, so I'm just going to bring it down here. So I have 1/2 O2 gas plus H2 gas, my hydrogen gas, and that creates H2O gas. This is a very, very important reaction. It's something that scientists are studying heavily, and so I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to get this down. Memorize it, okay? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You want to make sure you know this one. Now, why are we focusing on hydrogen? What's so specific about hydrogen? It's a teeny, 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 tiny molecule. I don't understand why we would be focusing on this as a source of fuel. Well, if you recall back to our old days when we were talking about our combustion reactions, it all came down to the amount of energy released per gram of fuel burned, okay? So we had a source of fuel, and then we charted out how much energy was released from that. So if you recall, we looked at wood first, then we looked at coal, then we looked at petroleum, then natural gas, which we remember is primarily methane, and now we're adding to this chart hydrogen gas. So let's go through here. Per gram of fuel source burned, for wood we release anywhere between 10 and 14 kilojoules of energy. For the best grade of coal, anthracite, we release about 30 kilojoules of energy per gram burned. For petroleum, it's closer to 48. Natural gas was our best source if we're just looking at per energy release per gram burned, which was 50. But here's the thing, for hydrogen gas, if you burn 1 gram of hydrogen gas, you release 124.5 kilojoules of energy, right? So that's more than twice the amount of energy released when we were just looking at natural gas. So if we had to pick a source of fuel, I would 100% hands down every single time try to use hydrogen as a source of fuel if we're trying to harness the energy that's released in its combustion reaction or whatever it is that we're doing, okay? Hydrogen is awesome. The big problem is it's so flammable and it's so explosive. You would have to be a crazy person to put hydrogen or a tank of hydrogen gas in your car and then drive around, because you would be dead in an instant if you ever got into any form of accident. All right, so that's what I'm going to leave you with. Take care of yourself, drink water, don't drive with hydrogen in your car.